Has your hair ever been extremely dry, matted, and tangled? Now I know it's difficult to tell from this video, but this is probably about 6 weeks of not detangling my hair. So this is bad. I found that perhaps the most difficult thing about being natural for me is detangling my hair and keeping my hair detangled. Today I'm going to share my top 5 tips for detangling my hair while minimizing damage. Before I even get started, let me first say that if your hair is very tangled, you need to be in the right state of mind to even approach the detangling process. It's really important that you have ample time and that you're not in a rush because this process is going to take a lot of patience. And if you are rushed, it's more likely that you're going to be impatient with your hair and potentially do things that could damage or break it. It's important that you handle your hair as gently as possible throughout the process of detangling. And sort of the most common analogy that people always say is to treat your hair as if it's fine silk. Now, the other important thing to remember throughout the detangling process is to actually listen to your hair. And by this, I mean to literally listen to your hair, specifically for sounds of breakage. Now, if you've ever broken a strand of hair, you know what that sounds like. And if during the detangling process you hear strands breaking, then you need to stop and maybe add moisture, maybe add some product that's going to increase the slip in your hair. But you really need to be proactive about listening to your hair and making sure you're not doing anything that is causing a lot of breakage. That should be your goal, to rarely hear the sound of breaking hair strands. So I'm going to be detangling my hair today after several weeks of it being dry and matted. So this is not ideal, but I'm going to show you guys what I do. And I'm also going to break down my top 5 tips for completing this process with minimal damage. Tip number 1 is to achieve the optimum moisture level in your hair. Now, I'm starting off with hair that is extremely dry, like has not been moisturized in quite a long time. So the first thing I typically do when my hair is like this is I'll divide my hair into 4 sections, which I usually do anyway whenever I start doing my hair. And then each of those sections, I first start off by spraying it with water. So I'm spraying it to get the hair just minimally damp, so that it has just some level of moisture in it. I'm not soaking the hair with water because I don't want it to shrink up, but I do want to add some moisture to it. So I'll spray each kind of quarter of my hair with water right before I'm about to start working with it. So it's really important that you add moisture to your hair because that is going to help minimize the amount of breakage that you might get. Water and water-based products essentially make the hair more pliable so that it doesn't snap and break when you manipulate it. Now, it doesn't have to be water. It could be a water-based moisturizer. It could be, of course, a conditioner. It could be aloe vera, but something that has water content in it that's going to add moisture to your hair. That's the very first step. Today you'll see me using water as well as this leave-in conditioner, and I use my fingers to help work the moisture into my hair. Tip number 2 is to apply the right products. And by this I mean a product that has slip in it. There is some overlap between tips 1 and 2 in that you can choose to use a product like a conditioner that has a lot of slip. But again, you don't want to add too much moisture to your hair that it starts to shrink up. So I would just kind of use that judiciously. What I like to use to add slip is typically a heavier oil like castor oil or coconut oil. So after I add water, then I will apply an oil. Here I'm using castor oil today. This is my Jamaican black castor oil as well as coconut oil. So I apply that directly to my hair after I've applied the water, and that adds more slip to my hair. It allows the strands of hair to sort of slide past each other, and it makes the detangling process so much easier. Now, if you have a conditioner that works really well and has a lot of slip, I think this is also the time when you can introduce that. But I personally really like using oil after I apply my water-based product. I find this makes my hair pretty soft, and it also helps tremendously in getting the shed hairs out, which I feel is pretty much most of the battle when I'm detangling my hair. Tip number 3 is to divide and conquer. Now, I already mentioned that I divide my hair into 4 sections before I even start the process of detangling my hair, and then I work with one section at a time. But even in working with that one section at a time, I further subdivide that section into smaller parts, because one of the best things you can do to minimize breakage and to minimize damage is to basically detangle in small enough sections that you can adequately get the knots out, get the shed hairs out without having to manipulate the same sections of hair over and over again. And it's a lot harder to do that if you're working with really big sections of hair, because you end up just kind of endlessly detangling one large section over and over again and not feeling like you're making much progress. So the first thing I do is, when I get my first section of hair, I further subdivide that into 4 equal sections. And then as I continue the detangling process, I'll make even smaller sections just depending on what I feel needs to be done in that moment. So you can see here some of those smaller sections. I feel like this is a reasonable section of hair to be able to tackle and to be able to quickly get the shed hairs out without having to over manipulate this section of hair. For me, a good rule of thumb in knowing whether I'm tackling too big a section of hair is if I start to feel frustrated, or as if I'm not making sufficient progress as I'm detangling my hair. That is probably a clue that I need to subdivide my hair into smaller sections and tackle those smaller sections. And that, just using that rule of thumb, has worked really well for me, and it helps keep my morale up as I'm detangling my hair. Tip number 4 is to be intentional and systematic about the way you detangle your hair. When I begin to detangle my hair, I have 2 general goals that are at the forefront of my mind. The number 1 goal is to get the shed hairs out, and then the number 2 goal is to unravel any knots and tangles. So I'm keeping these in mind as I begin to approach the process of detangling my hair. I mentioned getting the shed hairs out first because I found that actually shed hairs are one of the major reasons that my hair is tangled. Having those hairs that have fallen out but haven't actually come out of my hair, just kind of stuck in there, causes more tangles and knots than anything. So I'm really proactive about getting shed hairs out, and I found that it's so much easier to detangle the rest of my hair once those hairs are out. Now, as far as the actual process of detangling my hair, generally speaking, I think it's best to start with the ends of your hair and progress upwards, and that's usually what I do. But if my hair is particularly matted at the roots, I'll actually sort of separate out the roots with my hands and sort of pull them apart first. So you'll see me doing that here periodically, just depending on how matted my roots are. And once I feel like my roots have been sufficiently sort of pulled apart, then I'll start with the ends of my hair and do sort of this gentle raking motion to untangle the hair with my hands first. Now, I don't use a comb until I feel as if my hair is generally pretty well detangled with my fingers. And I'm not one to shy away from using the comb, but if my hair is particularly tangled, then I don't want to use the comb first, because I'll just be there forever combing and combing my hair, and that's just a lot of manipulation that's unnecessary. So I'll do the finger detangling first, and then I'll follow that up with a comb. And so you'll see me here starting with the ends of my hair, gently raking my fingers through the ends. As I'm doing that, I'm actually removing shed hairs. Any loose shed hairs that are at the ends, I'm pulling them out, and I'll periodically add more oil to my hair as I'm doing this, anything that allows me to have more slip and to pull those hairs out more easily. Castor oil is especially good for this. As I move up the length of my hair, I'm continuing to rake the hair with my fingers, and I'm essentially making sure all of the hairs are sort of going in the same direction, pulling out any shed hairs as I'm going along, and I progress all the way to the roots of my hair. You'll also notice that periodically I will separate the hair with my hands, and I sort of use this gentle pulling down method as well as sort of pulling apart. It's kind of hard to explain, but I'll show you what I'm doing. And I found this to be a very gentle way of separating hairs without breaking the strands that are sort of stuck together. And again, if I need to, I'll separate the hair into smaller sections that are easier to detangle. Once that particular section of hair is detangled with my fingers, then I'll progress using the comb. And again, I'll start with the ends of my hair and move up and get any residual shed hairs out. And then once that section is sort of done, I usually apply some more oil. I really like my oil, but I'll apply that to the length of the hair as well, and just make sure there are no sort of residual shed hairs that I can pull out. Tip number 5 is to keep the hair stretched. Now, this is really the last part of my detangling process. Once I've detangled a section of hair, I am very quick to immediately put it into a twist. You can also do a braid, but anything that's going to keep that section of hair stretched That's what you want to do. You want to keep it stretched and separate from the rest of the hair so you know what's detangled and what's not detangled. If you do happen to add an excess amount of moisture to your hair during the detangling process, then actually putting it into a braid or twist is going to help keep it stretched while it dries. And so it'll be less likely to shrink up and potentially tangle more. So that's another reason to do that. So that's it, guys. Those were my top 5 tips for detangling your very dry or matted hair. Hopefully that was helpful to you. As always, thank you guys so much for watching.